Hello and welcome to your Algebra week of May 16th recording. We are in week 18 and this is going to be the last week of new content for the school year. So that's pretty exciting. Last week of new content for the school year. Before I jump into some reminders, let's go ahead and start with a warm-up question. So I do want you to grab your math notebook and try this warm-up question in your math notebook where you need to solve for x using your tools that you learned last week. Remember, combining like terms, distributive property, things like that we learned last week to help you solve for x. And I want you to try it on your own first, and then you can check your work with mine. But remember, trying things on your own first, you're going to get so much more out of these recordings. So I want you now to go ahead and click pause and try this on your own, and then when you're ready to check your work with mine, click play. All right, so the first step is we need to look through and see if there's any parentheses, if there's any distributing we need to do. And I don't see any parentheses, so no distributing. So our next step is to look to see, can we combine any like terms? And I'm looking through here and I do see that there are some like terms. We've got a 2x and a 1x. So let's combine those like terms. And when we do that, we have 3x. We still have this 4 out, our constant that is part of the problem. So we just add our 2x's to get plus 1x to get 3x's and set that equal to 16. Now we're going to work on getting our x terms all alone. So in order to do that, we want to remove any constant. So we're going to remove the constant. And in this case, the constant term, squeeze an S in there, that's C-O-N-S, I missed the S there that first time around, is the 4. The constant is the 4. So right now that 4 is being added. There's no negative sign in front of the 4, so I know it's being added. So I'm going to do the opposite, and I'm going to subtract from both sides. And then I have 3x equals 16 minus 4 is 12. And now I'm on my last step where I'm going to solve for x. Now I'm on my last step where I'm going to solve for x. X is being multiplied by 3. The opposite of multiplying is dividing. So I'm going to divide each side by 3. 12 divided by 3 is 4. So my final answer is x equals 4. All right, so just some announcements as we head into the end of the school year. This week, you're going to complete 2 sessions. We're going to learn about how to solve when we've got variables on both sides, and then we're going to look at how we can solve equations by factoring, and then you're going to take the unit for review and test. Just a heads up that this is the last week for new material. There is about 9 days left in the school year. So please take a moment to look at where your grade is and think about what your goal grade is, and are you close to achieving that, and can you achieve that? Do you have missing assignments that need turned in? If so, make sure you're doing those now. The last day to submit work is May 24th. So again, May 24th is the last day to submit work. Please remember that if you are in high school, you do need to pass this class in order to move on to geometry next year. So if you do fail, you will have to retake this course by taking it credit recovery possibly during summer school. So hopefully all of us will avoid that and won't have to worry about that. But take a moment to look at your current grade and see where it needs to be in order to pass. Remember, you need a 60% or higher to pass. All right, so let's review what we've learned so far. So far we've learned we can solve equations involving one-step equations, two-step equations, where we use the distributive property to simplify, and then combining like terms. So those are things we've learned so far to solve for equations. This week, we're going to look at solving equations when we've got variables on both sides of the equation. So look at this problem below. And what I want you to look at is the fact that we've got an x term on the left side of the equation and an x term on the right side of the equation. And that's different than what we've looked at so far. So in the prior weeks, we've only had x variables on only one side of the equation. And now we're seeing them when we've got them on both sides of the equation. And how do we solve when that happens? So the strategy we're going to use is that we are going to get all of our variables on one side of the equation and all of our constant terms on the other side of the equation. Remember, constant terms, those are like our whole numbers. That's like 8 and 2. Those are our constant terms, they're our whole numbers. So what we want to do is we want to move the terms around, move them to the other sides of the equations, so that we get all of our variable terms, all of our x terms on one side of the equation and all of our constants on the other side of the equation. So how are we going to do that? So I'm looking here and I see I've got a 4x on the left and a 2x on the right. And my strategy says get all of the variables on one side and all the constants on the other. So I'm going to move this 2x to the other side of the equation. How do I move it? Well, I do the opposite of what's being done to it. So right now 2x is being added, so I'm going to subtract it from both sides. And look at how I'm lining up my 2x underneath my 4x so that I can do the math really quickly. So 4x minus 2x, I'm left with 2x. I still have this 8 hanging out on the left side of the equation, and now I've only got 2 on the left side. So my strategy was get all your constant terms on one side and all your variables on the other. So looks like I need to move this 8 to the other side of the equation. And I'm going to do that by doing the opposite of what's being done to it. I'm going to subtract it from both sides. When I subtract 8 from both sides, I'm left with 2x on the left side. Now I'm going to combine my constants. 2 minus 8 is negative 6. And now I've got 2x equals 6. I'm at a one-step equation. So to solve for x, I'm just going to divide each side by 2. And I'm left with x equals negative 6 divided by 2 is negative 3. And that's my final answer. So looking back, you can see that I moved my terms around and got all my variable terms on one side of the equation and all my constants on the other side. And that allowed me to solve for x. I'm going to go on to the next slide, so if you need more time, go ahead and click pause. All right, so let's try some more problems. Let's look at number 1. So I see that I've got an x term on my left side and an x term on my right side. So I don't want to have x terms on both sides. I want to move these so that I only have variables on one side of the equation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add 4x to both sides. I'm going to get rid of the underline so it doesn't look like I'm dividing. I'm going to add 4x to both sides to work on getting my x variables only on one side of the equation. So when I add 4x to both sides, I'm still left with negative 8 on the left side. 5x plus 4x is 9x. And I still have 10 on the right side. Now, remember my strategy is get all your constant terms on one side and on the opposite side, all your x variables. So I need to now, really we're at a two-step equation now, right? So now I just need to subtract 10 from both sides so that my x terms are on one side and my my constants are on the other side. So now I've got 9x equals negative 18. Now we're just going to solve for x. So x, to solve for it, I'm going to divide each side by 9, and negative 18 divided by positive 9 is negative 2. And I'm done. I solved for x. So what I'd like for you to do now is finish up taking notes on problem number 1, and then I want you to try to solve number 2 on your own. Give it a try. Click on pause, give it a try in your math notebook, and then when you're ready to check your work with mine, go ahead and click play. All right, so I want to move all my x terms so that they're on one side of the equation. So I'm going to add 2x to both sides so that now I only have my x terms will only be on the right side of my equation. When I do that, I'm left with 3 equals 7x minus 8. Now I'm at a two-step equation, right? So I'm going to work on solving for x by removing the constant from the side that the x is on. And I've got 7x equals 11. And now I've got 11 equals 7x. I want to get x all alone, so I'm going to divide each side by 7. And when I do that, I get x equals 11 over 7. And I'm going to keep my answer as a fraction because that's the most exact answer. If I want to, I could grab a calculator and take 11 divided by 7, and I'm going to get a decimal where I would have to round. So instead of rounding, I'm just going to keep my answer as a fraction because that's going to be my most exact answer. So go ahead and click pause if you need more time to take notes, and I'm going to move on to the next slide. All right, so the second part of this week's lessons, you are going to learn how you can solve equations by using the zero product property. And really, all the zero product property means is that when you multiply any number or numbers by 0, the product is always going to be 0. For example, let's say that we've got the number 10. If we multiply it by 0, it's going to be 0, right? Or let's say we've got 10 plus 6 in parentheses, and if we, because it's in parentheses, if we multiply that entire set of parentheses by 0, our answer is going to be 0. If we have 6 plus x in parentheses and multiply it by 0, our answer will be 0. So anytime you have 0 and you multiply it by a number or set of numbers, the answer is going to be 0. So, for example, let's look at when we've got parentheses with variables in it. So we want our equation to be equal to 0. See, it says equals 0 right here. So what's one number that if I plugged it in, it would give me a 0 so that when I multiplied it by the other set of parentheses, our overall product would be zeros. So what I mean is, like, look at this second set of parentheses. What would x equal when I subtract it by 2 to get me 0? So looking at that second set of parentheses, well, we know if I solve for it, I would add 2 to both sides, and I would get x equals 2. So if I plug in 2 for x, 2 minus 2 is going to be 0. So that means if I multiply that first set of parentheses by that 0, our overall answer would be 0. So a possible solution to this problem to get it equal to 0 would be that x can be equal to 2. So all I did here was set x minus 2 equal to 0, and I solved for x. Now we can do that with the other set of parentheses right here, x plus 3. So let's do the same thing there. Let's set up a problem, or we're going to say, well, if x plus 3 equals 0, then that whole entire equation would be equal to 0. So solve for x, subtract 3 from both sides, and I get x equals negative 3. So that's my other possible answer, that if I plug in negative 3 for x, that's going to give me a 0. And if I multiply by the other set of parentheses, I would get 0. So our solutions is going to be either x could equal 2 or x could equal negative 3. So either answer would work, and I need to give both possibilities to get full credit because that's the full part of the answer. So if you were answering this question, you would say that x could equal 2 or x could equal -3. Either one of those, and we're going to get an overall answer of 0. So all we do is set what we did to review there. All we did was we set each set of parentheses, right, one right here and then the other here. We set each set of parentheses equal to 0 and then solve for x. So that's how you use the zero product property. Is you're going to set each set of parentheses and the equations, I should say, the equations in the parentheses, you're going to set those equations equal to 0 and then solve. So that's how you solve by using the zero product properties. You're going to set each set of equations in the parentheses equal to 0 and solve, and you're going to get 2 answers when you do that. So let's look at that second problem. And let's do just what I said. So we're going to set each set of parentheses equal to 0. So each equation, x minus 6, set that to 0. Or our answer could be x plus 4 equals 0. And then I'm going to solve for x in both equations. So x plus 6, add 6 to both sides to solve for x. X can equal 6. Or if I subtract on this side to solve for x, I'm going to subtract 4 from both sides, and I get x equals -4. So in this problem, my 2 answers would be x is equal to 6 or x is equal to -4. And that's how we solve using the zero product property. I am going to go on to the next slide, so if you need more time, go ahead and click pause. Otherwise, I'm going to move on. So make sure you're taking good notes. All right, the second strategy we're going to use is by factoring. We're going to solve by factoring. So I wanted to review factoring really quick with you. So remember, when we factor and we've just got an x squared term out in front with no coefficient in the front, we can factor by finding factors of our constant term. So what 2 numbers that when we multiply it but times each other give us our constant term, but they also have to add up to our middle term. So this is how I always like to set it up, is factors of my constant term is 15, that when I add them up, I get my middle term, which is 8. So what are some factors of 15? Well, 1 and 15. But when I add those 2 numbers, they don't give me 8. So that's not going to work. What are some other factors of 15? How about 3 and 5? Okay. And then when I add 3 plus 5, do I get 8? I do. So that now is going to be the numbers we use when we factor. So when we factor, we put 2 sets of parentheses up. We know we have to multiply an x times an x. And then these 2 numbers right here are going to go here and here. So the 2 numbers here go here and here. And since they are both positive numbers, that's why I have both positive numbers in my set of parentheses. All right, look at the second equation, x squared minus 7x minus 2. And if you want, you can go ahead and click pause and try this on your own to review factoring. Remember, you get way more out of these recordings when you're trying things on your own. And then you can click play when you're ready to check your work with mine. All right, so we want factors of our constant term. In this case, it's a -10. That negative belongs to the 10. It's right in front of it. And then they have to add up to a -7. Make sure you pay attention to the negative signs. So what are some factors of 10? Well, we know I need to have a, whoops, I forgot. I wanted to change this to a plus sign. So that should be a +10, a +10. So what are some factors of a +10 that add up to a -7? Well, we know since they have to add up to a -7, our numbers, some of them need to be negative. And if one of them's negative, then the other has to be negative, because when we multiply a negative times a negative, we get a positive. So I'm thinking, okay, to get 7, if I add 5 and 2, that's going to also, negative 5 times negative 2 gives me that positive 10, and they add up to a negative 7. So our factoring would be x minus 5 and x minus 2. So sorry about that. I did mean to change that to a negative or a positive 10 before I told you to try it on your own. I'm going to go on to the next slide, so if you need more time, go ahead and click pause. So look at, though, before we move on, once we factor them, then we could set our equations equal to 0 and use the zero product property. And that's exactly what we're going to do when we solve by factoring. So I'm going to add some things in here that I forgot to add, our squares, and set them equal to 0 equations. So we want to solve these equations by factoring. So the first thing we're going to do is factor. And looking at that first problem, I see that we're looking for factors of 8, that when we add up our factors, we get 6. So we always constant factors that add up to our middle term, 6. So what do we have here? How about 2 and 4? Would that work? Well, 2 times 4 is 8. 2 plus 4 is 6. So that would work. So it's reds. I don't like red. So x plus 2 when we factor, x plus 4. Remember, it's set it equal to 0. And then we can use our product property, our zero product property, where we're now going to set each of our equations equal to 0 and solve for x. Set each of our set of equations in parentheses equal to 0 and solve for x. So to solve the first set or equation, I'm going to subtract 2 from both sides, and I get x equals negative 2. Or I can solve for my second equation and get x equals negative 4. So those are my two answers, that x can equal negative 2 or x can equal negative 4. So if you want to try the second problem on your own now, go ahead and click pause and try and work through that. So we've got x squared plus 2x minus 8 equals 0. So the first thing we want to do is factor. So I'm looking for factors of negative 8 that when I add them together equal positive 2. So we look here, and I know that I need a negative, two numbers. When I multiply them, they have to be negative. So I know one of them's got to be negative and the other would have to be positive. So what are some factors? 4 and 2. Negative 4 plus 2 gives me negative 2, so that wouldn't work. But what if I move this negative and make the negative, the 2 negative? Would that work? 4 times negative 2 is negative 8. 4 plus negative 2 is 2, so that would work. So now I've got my factored equation, x plus 4, x minus 2, set it equal to 0. And now I'm going to use my zero product property, where I set each equation in parentheses equal to 0 and solve for each. Whoops, that should be a negative. Let's change that really quick. There we go. Continue to solve. Subtract 4 from each side. For my first equation, get x equals negative 4 is one answer. Or I'm going to add 2 to both sides, and I get x equals 2. So those are my two answers. X could be equal to negative 4, or x could be equal to 2. That's it for this recording. I'm going to go to that last slide that has a key phrase assignment. So if you need more time here, go ahead and click pause. Otherwise, here we go. I'm going to put up the key phrase assignment. Your last key phrase assignment for the school year. So what we talked about the zero product property in the recording, how we can use it to solve for equations like the one below. So I want you to use the zero product property to solve the equation below. I've got reminders how to complete the key phrase assignment. Hopefully you're good on that now. Remember, you can always ask me questions as you're working through this week's assignments. Otherwise, have a fantastic rest of your week.